was Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones here on 88.1 FM WVYC. That was the close of the Vinyl Countdown by Nathan Staso. And you're listening to the voice of York College. My name is Keelan Tollinger, your host for the 3 to 4 o'clock hour. This is the final edition of In the Studio for the semester, and it wraps up about 3.5 months already since classes began. And this is also the 13th show that I've done so far, and maybe something will go horribly wrong with this unlucky number, but to remark a bit on what I've been up to this point, basically I just call it finding my own voice as an independent host. I'll never claim that I've been revolutionizing the airwaves here at the station. I haven't done anything too out of the ordinary and different, but it's been, me slowly getting more comfortable with the hobby here, captaining my own ship. I have to say that my workload just exponentially increases as far as preparation each week goes. Throughout Monday to Friday, this show is waited patiently before the weekend, and I write notes between class or in the evenings, mostly when I don't have much homework to do. I mean, this show becomes its own project, I guess. The thing that encourages me to keep thinking, and I can tell I'm going to miss it when I graduate from this campus in May. But let's talk about the here and now, though. So during the winter break, from December 18th and onwards till about mid-January, now is, I think, the best time for you to get caught up on past editions of the show and reminisce on some news, some heavy topics that I found the most interesting. You can go online to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger and find the archive of every show, all the monologuing without the music. It's been kind of a simultaneously busy and slow week so far. As for me keeping tabs on news, the period before finals is sort of like that, where I couldn't really sit down often and do some intensive research. This will just be an easy coast to the end of the hour, I think. The first order of business, though, is the one on-campus event that's been in the making since mid-semester. It got canceled from that big snowstorm initially, but it just took place Wednesday night. TEDxYCP, the night of educational, inspirational lectures put on by students and faculty of this school. Plenty to talk about what I learned. Former President George H.W. Bush passed away last weekend, so I'll touch on the legacy he leaves behind. You'll also hear a few stories in the world of sports, like why anyone would need to bring their teddy bear to a hockey game only to throw it inside the rink. Plenty of music to hear as well. We'll jump right in starting with The War on Drugs and their song Nothing to Find. You're listening to 88.1 FM, and the first topic awaits when I come back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. You're with me, Keelan Tollinger, and that was The War on Drugs with Nothing to Find. And let's jump into the first topic of the afternoon. It finally happened after a cancellation at first. TEDxYCP, a lecture series put on by students for students to imitate that inspirational learning mindset that these TED conferences and TED Talks I'm interested in. This was the second annual one, and hopefully they're looking to put on a third in the spring semester. It started at 6 p.m. in the Wilman Business Center, and it was a pretty impressive presentation, I've got to say. And before I get anywhere, huge props to Oscar Winters. He was a former student that graduated here in 2014, but happens to be working with the college now. And also a senior like me, his name is Felix Diaz, who organized the first TEDyCP last year because he was curious about getting student speakers to be giving leadership talks or lectures about ways to improve a college student's life, inspire them in some way. Felix approached Oscar about putting this whole thing together, and though I missed the first, I didn't expect to see outside of the lecture hall this long table with a professional-looking banner reading out the name of the event, an independently held TED conference on it. Everyone who entered also got a name tag and also a small gift bag of promotional goods. Here at WVYC, whenever we have a table outside of a student event, like we set up during a special dinner at Johnson Dining Hall and play music, all of the stickers, cups, sticky notes, magnets, potato chip bag clips, everything has WVYC on it. We collectively call that swag. So I got free TEDyCP swag. A notebook, a ballpoint pen, a stress ball that you can squeeze in your hand. Pretty high quality stuff. I only estimate about 75 people or so attended the event. And in typical conferences, they have hundreds and hundreds of these people all listening to a couple different speakers, but I would call that a decent turnout for the college. So I'd like to give each presentation a bit of time to talk about what ideas these 4 students shared. And it was actually quite a bit of a surprise to know that they were all students because each of them were great speakers. They were pretty well accomplished, and their experience in their fields, I think, helped them a lot to generate an entire talk about what interests them the most. So the first speaker was Amani W.J. Wright in his speech titled Erasing the Myths of Writing. I perked up immediately seeing something like that on the itinerary because it was like, I'm a writing major. I've never seen Imani around in my classes or the writing center, but he introduced himself as a person more in public relations first, basically, because he was actually a journalist at the Baltimore Times, an online newspaper about positive stories. He's also a musician as well, doing some recordings. His talk was all about writer's block, in essence. He gave the experience of trying to draft up an article for his newspaper and sometimes not having the right words to put on the page. Like every college student, his first solution is to take a nap. That's how everyone in this generation tackles their most obvious problems, but he also proposed sort of a 3-part code to his interpretation of writing that he sort of figured out after he got up. And first, it's all about thinking. Secondly, it's studying. But thirdly, it's scary. I can kind of agree with all these because as a writer, it's evidently the case that nothing appears out of your mind from thin air. It takes thinking, working through different patterns of words, different phrases. When writing is about studying, the equivalent Imani gave was that as an aspiring musician, he needed to start analyzing the structure of songs to understand what those pieces of art were doing successfully. How does this note flow into the next? How does this sentence flow into the next? And you ultimately have to pay attention to what other artists, other writers are doing, and absorb their work with a purpose. Study it. And last, that writing's scary. I mean, sure, I can accept that too. Writer's block is basically getting tripped up over whether what you say is right, how the people reacting to it are going to think. It's overcoming a fear to communicate when you commit to learning about writing. So I totally agree with Imani there. I'd maybe argue as somebody who's got some research about how college students, for instance, think about their own ability, what they come to the writing center for, and all the pieces and parts that prove it's a messy experience. I mean, writing's maybe not as simple as it looks, but one extra takeaway that was tied to writing was that it isn't interesting. I mean, nothing is supposed to be interesting. Imani had an English teacher in 11th grade with a word graveyard, like words and terms that you should avoid using. And interesting is basically a mental roadblock in itself. He would never be taught something and say in response like, oh, that's interesting. Like the mind doesn't stop there. A topic has to be something more than just interesting. And as I keep saying this, I'm trying not to be aggravated by this word myself because now I believe it's not good enough to describe anything. But that was a great first lecture to start off the night. Best of luck to Imani with his work at the Baltimore Times. Anyway, it's about 3:16, about quarter way through the hour. Let's get the first weather check of the hour out of the way. And let's move on to the second topic of this TED YCP conference. This was from a sophomore named Olivia Roth, and her presentation was called Nurture Over Nature. This was a big behavioral, psychological kind of talk. Olivia was the daughter of a teen mom, as she introduced herself, and that made her statistically only around 50% of a chance of graduating high school and 20% of becoming a teen mom herself. But as it turns out, she was neither of those things. So her claim was that while some people are often in a camp that say your biology, what you inherit from your parents decides most of your life, like skin color, eye color, your physical qualities, Olivia thought that the environment you're in socially, the people you surround yourself around, what you pick up from others, that's more a determinant influence in your life. She gave examples of a really old study with this Bobo the clown, like an inflatable doll, And there was one group of kids that watched a video of an adult punching around the life-sized balloon and beating it up, and another group watching a video of a grown-up being friendly to it, hugging it. Both groups of kids were put into a room with the clown doll and did the same thing as the adults they watched. Olivia told of a girl in Ukraine named Oksana Malaya, known as a feral child, someone who was basically raised by animals. She was neglected by her alcoholic parents at a young age and somehow wound up living in an environment surrounded by dogs. So at 7.5 years old, when authorities in the Ukraine found her, she was barking to communicate, only moved on her hands and knees, slept on the floor. Oksana has had numerous documentaries and interviews about this condition by now. This is like 1991 when it was like first breaking. But it was another example from Olivia about how while we as humans might not be biologically different from one another, socially we can be melded into other behavioral patterns. It's what we get from mentors. We imitate them basically. And now Olivia today is actually applying some of that knowledge about nature versus nurture because she's a student mentor for middle schoolers at the local McKinley School here in York. And she said some of the students come from very diverse, sometimes difficult backgrounds. Just before she came in to do her TED Talk, a young girl she spoke with that day said her mother had beaten her and she had to run away. And this after-school program was so important to her. It's so important to Olivia, too. Basically, important for all of society to have this system of encouraging mentors that work against the nature cycle. The cycle that says your background, what you're born into, is your life. Olivia said that so many of the kids in this after-school program still want to be doctors, and one wants to be an astronaut. And hopefully they keep believing that they can be anything they set their mind to. I think that was all just a particularly inspiring lecture that makes people question, what do we want to surround our kids with? Is it going to be like signals about punching inflatable clowns or something else more positive than that? After Olivia's presentation, there was an intermission and for some refreshments, and I've gone on for quite a while about TED YCP so far, and that's only the first two speakers. There's so much more to talk about with these speeches that they're kind of like their own topics, and let me take a music break and come back with the second half of the speeches. I'll tell you what I learned about the benefits of Taekwondo and the future of technology thanks to science fiction when I return here on 88.1 FM. On this final edition of In the Studio for the fall semester. Here is Interpol with number 10 from the station at WVYC. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and I'll be back shortly. Number 10 by Interpol here on 88.1 FM WVYC. My name is Keelan Tollinger. Thanks for tuning into this edition of In the Studio. And I want to quickly finish up the lectures from this York College TED conference that was held Wednesday night. So the second half of the event started with a presentation titled Taekwondo is the Answer by a student named Derek So. He is a martial arts instructor at a training studio in Hanover, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles away. He's a Korean American who started learning the art at around 4 years old because the place he works in was founded by his grandfather and grandmother. But as he told all of us listeners, the training's given him a lot of physical and mental benefits as a result. First, you had to clear up with us, Taekwondo isn't as flashy and destructive as the Chinese kung fu movies when you think of Bruce Lee and other actors. There's 5 tenets about what it takes to be involved with the practice. And, well, before I go anywhere into that, he actually had us try something out in our seats to first properly make a fist. and then Derek kind of did like a motion on the stage where he showed how quick the motion has to be. Like, his words are like, don't swing a log, snap a whip to properly punch something. And next, Felix Diaz, the event organizer, he asked him to hold up a piece of paper out to his side, and Derek, in a full dress suit and pants and shoes, demonstrated a kick, where to actually defend yourself against someone coming towards you, you spin around backwards to lean away from them, and then come back around with your heel. And he actually clipped the corner of the paper with his toes, and like his foot was like shoulder level. It was like at arm height. It was really, really impressive. Got a round of applause. But anyway, those 5 tenets of this particular martial art. So Derek teaches mostly kids from 6 to 12 years old, and the mental aspects that he tries to instruct them on starts with courtesy. So addressing everyone respectfully, his students call him Master Derek, and he, to actually internalize this in them, he calls them Master Sam or Master Julia. They bow to each other at the same level before and after every lesson. Next comes integrity, like being honest about your personal level of commitment. A student can say they've trained really hard, but their effort has to show in the lessons. Perseverance is next, that's basically to never give up, keep pushing on in the face of tough obstacles. Self-control obviously is taught because while these arts can seriously do damage to people, it's important to have that discipline. And control also comes from their diets too and their practicing habits. So no Fortnite gaming instead of training, as he laughed about it. And the fifth one, the indomitable spirit, as Derek referred to it as, is something that even he doesn't have completely. It's kind of like I guess I could put it like the ever-enduring quest for self-completion that goes on until the day you pass. And I hope summarizing it that way isn't oversimplifying it and disrespecting it, but that's mostly the impression that I got as an outsider to the whole practice. But to be honest, I just really admired the way he broke down each of the principles, added some humor to really make the tradition of Taekwondo fun to learn about. And for someone in college, he's as good of an elementary school teacher as any just from the way he carries himself. And his final question, his last line of his presentation, was the perfect ending. He simply said, "My question to you is, can anyone tell me a downside to martial arts?" And with his whole lecture being titled Taekwondo is the answer, I just thought that was a neat way to tie everything together. And I think he definitely had the best structure, the best flow to his presentation. But to break down this last lecture for you, a student named Josiah Sam and his talk, Technology, Science Fiction, and the Future. And he personally gets the reward for the most passionate talk about his interest, and probably the most mind-boggling. So he is, I think, a computer science major, a self-proclaimed nerd, lover of all kinds of science fiction from Star Wars to Star Trek. He just went on and on about all the inventions they have normally in these science fictional media series, but they're becoming real pieces of technology today. So first, a power suit in exoskeleton armor, sort of like the superhero Iron Man. Josiah found some research and some photos of a tech lab in 2015 or so with a robotic suit around a full-grown man, which at that current point in time could lift 500 pounds of weight or something crazy without the guy's muscles feeling a thing. I think as an unscientific person myself, seeing it, the photos, I mean, electricity powers the joints of the suit, and they do all the lifting, and they're strapped on outside of the limbs. And if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear some of this other stuff. So the power of invisibility. I'm sure what militaries like to cloak their drones in so they can't be seen to the eye. Josiah shared another laboratory's progress into what they call metamaterials. They look a bit like tiny, less than a millimeter in size, individual sequins on a coat, and they can bend light from the angle they're facing, and I guess wrap around somehow that they're completely see-through, and it hides whatever's inside of it. And there's no photos yet, but they're thinking invisibility cloaks from Harry Potter with this. But next comes the sci-fi invention of teleportation, which hasn't been tested on humans yet, thank God. But Josiah shared this article from several news sources about how Chinese scientists have successfully cloned a photon in a lab, like a particle of light, and sent the new one out into space, miles away, and get that distant one to talk to its clone from one end of the planet to the other, and basically say delete yourself, I am the only photon. And that essentially just from one end of the planet to the other erases the original out of existence. It makes no sense, but my guess is that over the years they'll try moving up to larger things, copying grains of sand next, and duplicating the composition of it, moving it elsewhere, then making the original disappear. When it gets faster and faster, we might see the effects of instant teleportation in the real science fiction media. But anyway, back to Josiah. Last piece of real technology they're developing for the future is the force field. He shared with us a patent by Boeing Technology, known for their planes, but a patent for a device that can produce intense waves of heat for a brief moment and flash in front of a projectile. So the sun is made of plasma. If we can, fire a screen of plasma in a precise spot in front of an oncoming missile or something, in that brief moment it can be vaporized into nothingness so the people inside the barrier cannot be harmed. It's crazy. I know I'm not making a lot of sense, but this is coming from the diagrams that Josiah put up in his presentation screen and virtually explained to us that these fledgling technologies that we thought were 20, 30 years away in the future are happening just about now, but not quite at the practical real-world scale that we might imagine. And though most people in the public would have their minds blown, maybe want to see this in everyday life, like a powered suit to turn a 6-man job into a 1-man job, lifting crates in a warehouse or teleporting ourselves to work, unfortunately there's snags. That'll take an unthinkable amount of battery power, electricity, energy in general to do so much. And the fact that the military would mostly like to develop these things like invisibility and impenetrable shields for combat instead. But I like Josiah's talk from the standpoint that the future is basically already here, and we need more engineers, more programmers, more computer-inclined people out in these technology companies to keep working towards a day when these science fiction concepts are for everyone to benefit from. So overall, I think it was a very successful and interesting conference. I hope that more people get involved in these TED Talks because I'm not over-exaggerating when I say that this was a production of really high caliber. And, the speakers were all very prepared and engaging. The stage was lit up and had a giant TED logo, cardboard cutout in bright red. The audiences just need to top more than 100 people, I feel. And anyway, I've talked about this TED stuff for quite a while now, and I think it's time to move on. I've gotten past the halfway point of the hour, so I'm going to get into the public service announcement for the hour. I'll run through some news on the passing of President George H.W. Bush when I come back from this quick music break. Coming up from the station library next is Death Cab for Cutie. I dreamt we spoke again. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and you're listening to 88.1 FM WVYC, and I'll be back shortly. Welcome back in the studio on 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. That was Death Cab for Cutie. I dreamt we spoke again. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and you're with me in the studio for about 20 minutes more. Let's jump into the news that you've definitely heard about Bush 41 passing away on November 30th. And from all the secondhand accounts that I heard through the media, what I researched about him, what I gathered from that amazing eulogy that his son George W. gave at that cathedral in Houston on Wednesday morning, he was from all intents a great man and father. And if you haven't looked up George W.'s speech at the funeral, go find some raw footage on your favorite news source, especially so you can find out what his last words were. It was just pretty amazing to listen to. There was a father-son presidency in the past in John Adams and John Quincy Adams. But in the modern day, the American public, I think, got to see that dynamic in everyday life. And that's pretty wholesome. And there wasn't much said about George H.W.'s achievements as a president during that eulogy, but I think it's also important that what you do for your family in your lifetime comes first. So he hated broccoli, wasn't good at his short game in golf, dove out of a plane just a short time ago. I'm surprised that I actually didn't hear about his near-death experience in World War II until just recently, in all honesty. That he joined the Navy soon after the beginning of the United States' involvement. And by the way, how fitting is it that today is Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day? But George H.W. survived the sea for 4 hours after being shot down, and that's a pretty remarkable second chance. But by no means he was a perfect president. Some publications bring up his troubles with the Iran-Contra affair, pardoning officials under Ronald Reagan after George H.W. lost in the election. And I think the biggest impact was in the Gulf War. I believe like the whole Desert Storm operation, where the United States sent hundreds of thousands of troops under his command. And unfortunately, there were thousands of civilian losses caught in the crossfire by the multiple bombing runs that America and the other nations carried out. The Amiria shelter in particular, where 400 civilians were killed. I just sort of think of the possible war crimes that Trump could carry out if he's not careful. And I just imagine this accident over 2 decades ago would stand as a warning about that. But yesterday, however, after some more services for the former president, his casket was loaded up in a train locomotive commissioned in his honor, the 4141, with a transparent car for spectators to salute his casket as he was taken through a few small towns on the way to College Station, Texas, where his grave will be by his presidential library. It's, I think, the 8th presidential funeral train in history. I think this is according to the Associated Press, which started all the way back with Abraham Lincoln. Dwight D. Eisenhower was the last president, and although he wasn't quite the head of the country, Robert Kennedy had a huge crowd of onlookers for his funeral. This train for George H.W. Bush was apparently planned on being used for years, from what a family spokesperson said. All in all, I think the services and tributes have been outstanding, and I have a lot of respect for the Bush family, especially for the long-time marriage that H.W. shared with his wife. It was like 73 years long, and that like the longest in the history of presidential marriages. I think like the Adams or James Madison or somebody way back when, the time of the founding fathers, that was only for like 53 years. Just so impressive. Just about all I had to share about the passing of the nation's 41st president. I'll take a short break and come back with a couple stories about this week in sports. But first, here is Marble Sounds with a song from their newest album that came out in the fall called The Advice to Travel Light. This one is titled The Road. Give it a listen, and I'll be back in less than 3 minutes here on WVYC. Stay tuned. Marble Sounds with The Road here on 88.1 FM WVYC. Welcome back. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and I want to do a tour of the week in sports really quick, but right after I get to this second weather check of the hour out of the way. And to get into these like rapid fire series of stories, a bunch of topics in one segment, there was a crazy but also kind of heartwarming event that took place Sunday night in Hershey, Pennsylvania. This was during a minor league ice hockey game between the Hershey Bears and the Binghamton Devils. This is the teddy bear toss, a tradition for minor league teams in the AHL to have a home game where the fans throw stuffed bears into the rink and donate them to charity, less fortunate kids. And as soon as the first goal for this side is scored, then the crowd just starts chucking them from the stands over the tall glass and just littering the ice. It stops the game, but it's for a good cause. So, I mean, the record belonged to the Calgary Hitmen after 2015 with 28,800 bears. For the Hershey game on Sunday, they blew out that total with 34,800. And there's a video online of the first goal being scored, and suddenly the floodgates open, and just hundreds and hundreds of these stuffed animals start raining down the players. The commentator in the booth is going, "It's teddy bear toss time, what a beautiful sight in Chocolate Town." And actually in the background you can hear like the microphones pick up the sounds of all the bears hitting the rink. Like just thousands of fluffy things like bouncing all at once that it's loud enough to be heard. You have like the sea that's forming behind the glass of all the bears that didn't make it over, like piling up in the front row over people. There's a couple that were like oversized, like 3 feet tall, like ones you win at like carnival games that took like a bunch of spectators, like a team effort to hoist over the glass. I think it'd only be fun to attend if you were in like the back seats. But some more statistics, there were about 1,000 people in attendance. So that meant an average of like 3.5 bears were brought per person. 30 different organizations get a share of the donated toys, as well as the tens of thousands of monetary dollars that were collected that night as well. Another charity called Community Aid donated 50 cents for every bear. And apparently, an anonymous season ticket holder pledged a dollar donation for every single stuffed animal as well. What a way to break in the Christmas season. I guess I'm not much of a fan of hockey to know the answer to this, but what happens when the home team doesn't score a goal that night? Like, I imagine the fans will just be directed to leave the stuffed animals in boxes as they're leaving the stadium, but to me that sounds like such a letdown. Other than that, Ohio State's college football head coach announced earlier this week that he is retiring from his position after the Rose Bowl game in January. This is head coach Urban Meyer. As a Penn State fan, hooray, hooray, open the champagne and set off the streamers. He's getting out of the Big Ten conference, basically. But really, you have to acknowledge just how dominant of a coach he is. Urban Meyer's record at Ohio State was 82 wins and 9 losses in 7 years. In 17 years of head coaching, 186 and 32. That's one of the highest winning percentages in history. I think the third highest. But with a sharp mind for the game, I guess comes with a lot of headache. Because his health has been the biggest concern he's citing for retirement. He's been dealing with an arachnoid cyst in his brain for years now, and it gives him a lot of pain. During the Indiana game with his team, he dropped to his knees on the sideline and held his head for a short time. So ultimately, I guess he's departing from coaching to get away from all that stress. But other reporters are speculating that he won't be able to stay away for long. He's just too passionate about the game. And speaking of coaches, on Sunday, the rules of British soccer were broken, and the country practically turned inside out when the coach of Liverpool's soccer team ran out onto the field as the game was going. This coach, his name's Jurgen Klopp, had a good reason to, though, because Liverpool were playing their fellow city rivals, Everton Football Club, when at the very last seconds of the game, it was scoreless at that point. A Hail Mary kick got sent into the opposing team's box in front of the net. The goalkeeper for Everton, this guy's Jordan Pickford, tried to catch it and secure it, but it bounced off the top bar of the net not once, but twice, and a Liverpool player flew in with his head and nodded it just a few inches past for the only score of the match. The stadium, of course, bursts into a bunch of screaming and outruns the coach, Jurgen Klopp, to hug his goalkeeper on the opposite end of the field and hop around excitedly with him. Well, that's against the rules, obviously, even if you do that for 15 seconds. You have to stay on the sidelines, they call it the technical area, until the final whistle. So afterwards, he was fined 8,000 British pounds, or that's about $10,200 US, by the Football Association, like a player being fined by the NFL in this country. Jurgen Klopp apologized in a post-game interview to his rival coach. He actually got defended by several other coaches around the league, saying it shouldn't have been a penalty because, really, who wouldn't want to storm the field when a last-minute winner against your biggest rivals gets scored? I'm actually really surprised that no fans wound up running on from the stands because, there's really no exaggeration that from the British spectators to the players themselves, everyone stays really civil. Soccer players even walk out of the same tunnel together simultaneously. It's just tradition to behave and be sportsmanlike to the other side. But anyway, that's the final point I've got to make about the newsworthy week in sports in America and across the pond. And I'll finish up the hour, only 10 minutes left, with this final song of the semester from Milo Green. Their song Autumn Tree is next, and you're listening to me, Keelan Tollinger, on the voice of your college. Stay tuned for the final topic of the semester. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and that's all the material that I have down for this week. And that'll do it for this last edition of the fall 2018 semester. When I come back to the studio, it'll be a whole new year with different stories to tell. The first show in the year dealt with the passings of John McCain and the children's show actor Stephen Carl Stephenson, who became an internet legend. I covered the benefits of shortwave radio and the YouTube personality who loved the medium as much as food. Serena Williams and the U.S. Open fallout after she was penalized in the championship and brought up a discussion about equal treatment of men and women in the sport of tennis. Hurricane Florence, and the several stories of both the destruction and the young girl named Florence Wisniewski who wanted to help the families affected. The question about what college students are learning these days, and the struggle to answer it, electric scooter sharing and the troubles with revolutionizing the morning commute, and Tiger Woods' resurgence, Judge Brett Kavanaugh and the debate about getting women's voices heard and believed, the NotPetya virus, and the threat that hacking can have on global business. And then my personal favorite story, that official brand TED Talk about YouTube's algorithm and the monotony and danger of children's videos. I covered the immigration debate through the eyes of a former White House advisor visiting the campus. We dealt with the Democratic mail bombings, a missing Saudi Arabian journalist in Jamal Khashoggi. I saw my last York College men's soccer game at the end of October. And in November, I caught up with my past co-host Bobby Furta, and we'll see if we can welcome him back at some point next semester along with some other guests. A change in our Congress, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts having a small argument over their naming rights, the fake GoFundMe campaign between a homeless man and a couple who wound up effectively scamming him, and just last week, the sad news about SpongeBob SquarePants' creator passing away, but the birth of perhaps the world's first genetically modified babies. I told you all about this week's stories and things to note, and that's basically this semester in a recap. Thousands and thousands of spoken words, dozens of songs played, and over 12 hours, I think, of broadcasting on the air. It's been a great experience so far, and there's plenty more to come in a hopefully newsworthy 2019. In the meantime, you can check out my channel on youtube.com if you want to catch up on anything that I've talked about. You can search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger to get every past show to listen to. Until the third week of January or so, I get a break from preparing this broadcast every school week. But I will rejoin you in the studio again every Friday at 3 p.m., hopefully with more refinements to the experience, topics of note, and music to discover. Once again, my name is Keelan Tollinger, and thank you so much for joining me this semester. It really means a lot to me as I learn about what it means to be a broadcaster, and that's especially the case as I wind down with my time here at WVYC. Thanks for tuning in and take care. We will leave off with Body Type and their song Palms here on 88.1 FM. Have a good winter break.